My name is Arik. I'm currently the head women's tennis coach at Stevens. It's a small engineering school in Hoboken, New Jersey. And I'm here to talk about men's mental health, which is nice because I'm often so involved with the women's team and actually really focused on our team and things that are not always having to do with men. So it's really nice to be here. And so yeah, a little bit about me. I went to Stevens, so I'm an alumni. I've been at Stevens now for almost 10 years. Sports I played growing up, mainly tennis, basketball, also played baseball. So all kinds of sports. My experience with mental health, like to kind of a quick story, and happy to answer questions or go more in depth about this after. But I remember when I was an assistant coach, this kind of sums it up. We used to do a mile test for our men's team because I was the assistant coach for men and women. And I remember we had an athlete on the men's team who came to me and the head coach. He's like, guys, I can't, like I think I'm ready. I've been training, but every time I think about the mile test, I get an anxiety attack and I just can't, I don't feel like I can perform the test. And it was an important test for us. It was kind of like a minimum, mile time. And if you didn't pass, you didn't play. And I remember at the time, I was like 24 years old, thinking like, this is like BS. Like I remember thinking clearly that it's all mental. And I didn't understand how someone could have an anxiety issue with the mile test. And yeah, I just didn't understand it. I couldn't relate to it. And then fast forward 5 years later, I went through my own mental health challenges, my own crisis, if you will. For me, it was depression and then anxiety that came along with it. And all of a sudden, I understood really well how someone can go through something like that, and it's very real. And so for me, I kind of had to go through the challenge myself. At 24 as an assistant, I wanted to be a head coach, and I thought one of the ways I'll become a head coach is to get a master's, which is quite common for college coaches. And I, at the time, wanted to get a master's in mental health counseling, social work, something in that area, because it was a topic I was interested in, even though I had not really experienced it much myself. And then now I joke, I got the best education possible, which was going through my own mental health challenges. And then I promised myself when I was going through it, this is like about 5 years ago now, that I'll never forget the feeling of suffering and just the challenges that mental health can bring, and that I'll always dedicate part of myself if I ever work again to mental health and to helping those who suffer. So that's kind of why I'm here. It's really important to me. Now I'm very involved on campus. Mental health is a topic that I love. Mental resilience, mental strength, all of that, high performance. But it's very personal for me of how and why I got so involved. And so it's very nice to be here and to share. And like I said, I'm happy to talk more about that. But that's kind of my quick story of why I'm so passionate about mental health and why it's good to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, Arik. Chaz, you want to go?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for being here, everybody. This is great. Seeing the amount of people that have jumped on and so my name is Chaz Donati. I live in Scottsdale, Arizona. Currently, I've been out here for about 12 years. So, I'm 33 years old, and sports have been my entire life. Since probably 5 years old. Anything stick ball related, I picked it up and I did it. And I played competitive ice hockey until I was about 23 years old. Also picked up baseball all the way through high school. So, my entire life really surrounded sports. And, my take on mental health really started to kind of start to realize very self-inflicted. I was just so drawn into just playing sports, working out, and really trying to reach that pinnacle level of professional sports. And, when I realized that wasn't in reach, it was time to start thinking about what was next for me and my life. And, unfortunately I didn't have a foundation that was built outside of sports. And, I never reached that professional level, like I mentioned, but that doesn't matter because all athletes deal with a lot of different what I've come to realize is mental health related issues. I actually, I'm glad to be here and share my story too. So I actually saw the other side of sports when I really was not involved, and I became heavily addicted to sports gambling. So I battled a sports gambling addiction for the better part of my entire 20s, so better part of a decade. And it took up until about a few years ago to really get some help. And so, when your whole life is sports and you really never reach that professional level, you start watching it on TV more, that you can do it still. The whole mindset around sports never really changed for me for my love, but I started to see the other side of it, which is the sports gambling. And so, that's where I really had to take a step back and look at my entire childhood of sports. Was I always on the right path? Did I have the right coaches in place? Did I have, performance coaches, nutrition coaches, people that really maybe could have gotten me to that pinnacle peak? And so, a big part of why I'm glad to be here too is I've decided to go back to school and get my master's in sports psychology, so I can be a performance coach for youth athletes and also help potential sports gambling addicts take that first step towards recovery. So, mental health in the sports world goes far beyond just your playing sport. And so, I hope I can bring some personal experience and some knowledge and any questions you guys might have to everything involving sports, because as gambling starts to become more legalized and in our faces with ESPN and all the advertising on TV, that's where I kind of really struggled. And it all kind of started after I was done playing sports and not having that foundation built and ready for what was next in life. Because at the end of the day, sports are going to come to an end for everybody, right? It's just a matter on how quickly we joke about it, but how quickly you get to men's league in hockey is when your career is over. And so, I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to, answer a lot of questions involving mental health. I continue to learn every single day. Like I said, I'm 33 years old, have completely changed my career path now into a new venture with psychology and performance coaching. So I've been around the ringer a few times, and, it all starts with yourself and talking about it more. And I'm very happy to be a part of, especially a men's panel. Because everybody does struggle, male or female, but, I hope we can help everybody along the way, especially if you guys love sports as much as I do.
Awesome. Thanks. And for those of you who are newer in the program, I actually sat on this panel, I think 3 years ago now. And it was the first time that I had ever talked about my story. And I think that it's really powerful that we can have like this safe space to ask questions as well. No question is dumb, right? I just listened to Travis and Jason's podcast today. Like, they have that segment that's no dumb questions, and I truly believe that. So if you guys have questions for anybody, including myself, I'd be happy to share some insight as well. So Arik, if you want to kind of tell a little bit about like your story, feel free to dive in as much as you want to, and hopefully we can show people that it's something that men deal with and it's okay to talk about, and hopefully we can learn something from this too.
Yeah, I'm happy to. And like you just said, if anyone has questions like that, I'm an open book, so I'm happy to share. So my story, like my real struggle came from, I would call, a perfect storm of things. I was an assistant coach for 4 years, and I moved to Philadelphia from Hoboken. So I was living here in New Jersey, and I moved to Philly for a job, what I thought was my dream job, right? First head coaching job in college tennis. And it was the head coaching job at Haverford College outside of Philly. And I really thought this was my dream job. I was finally made it. I'm a head coach, got my own apartment. That was a big deal, because having roommates in Hoboken, I thought, okay, now I have my own apartment, no roommates, head coach, bump in salary. I don't know, all the stuff that I thought was a dream. I moved to Philly, and I just crashed, just absolutely crashed. Went through a tough breakup from long distance that didn't work. And then I started blaming myself for going to Philly. So what became a dream turned into a nightmare because my mind started, I can see this now. At the time, I didn't see it, but my mind was attacking me. Every thought waking up was critical of myself. I was regretting every decision. You know, you're so stupid. Why did you come here? You cost the love of your life. You know, at the time that was really what I felt. I don't think that was the case now anymore, but at the time, I thought this was, you know, the girl I was going to marry. So now every day I'm thinking, you cost so much that you gave up for this. You're such an idiot. You're so stupid. You know, why did you leave, you know, where you were left? You were so happy there. Like every thought was negative. And the interesting thing is now looking back, the negative thoughts started well before I crashed, but I didn't know that at the time. And it was a lot of feelings of not being good enough, of thinking being an assistant coach isn't good enough anymore. And that's something that with time, with therapy, and just with reflection, I've come to that realization that I, to be totally honest, I met this girl and thought I wasn't good enough for her here in New York. And I thought if I was a head coach, I'd be good enough. You know, if I had my own apartment, I'd be good enough. So a lot of these thoughts came from not being good enough. And where that comes from is you know, an interesting thing that is very, very valuable to go to therapy for me. But yeah, it was, you know, at the time I just crashed. And to give you a little bit of specifics, like I couldn't get out of bed. Like it's amazing that I survived a year as a coach because just showing up to practice took all my power to get out of bed. And that's kind of what kept me going, was having my team, and I had to get out of bed to go to practice. And after practice, I just go back home and go back to bed. And I remember I had a student athlete at the time, one of the players, and she once said, like, "Coach, it always feels like you're not here, you know." And if only she knew I was not there. You know, mentally I was really struggling. And after 1 year I left. I felt I couldn't give the team what they deserved, and I wasn't in the right headspace. So after my season in summer, I moved back to New York area, and I actually stayed with my dad. So now I'm a 28-year-old, you know, unemployed, feeling even worse about myself. And I went through about like 4 or 5 months of just trying to get myself together, and eventually, you know, got myself together with the help of therapy, with the help of a part-time job, and just like laying bricks, you know, one at a time. And that's a whole other process, whole other thing that I don't want to talk too much now, so I'll leave it at that. But kind of had to rebuild myself and rebuild who I was, who I thought I was. And it was a really humble crisis. And yeah, that's my story of how I began to struggle.
Yeah, I do have a quick question for you. So when you first like had somebody else notice that you were struggling, like what was your initial reaction to that?
Um,
I know it was a while ago, so if you could like
yeah, no, it's interesting question. I knew I was struggling. So that was the interesting thing for me. I was quite open. So I think with some, I have some, now this is a men's panel, so I'll focus on the male side of it. I have friends, male friends, who they don't open up as much. And I think that one of the challenges is we don't always open up. We hold things in, and we try to, you know, deal with it ourselves. I was quite open with my family, with parents and my sister. I would call them all the time that I was struggling, but I just wasn't able to, when someone would share a perspective with me, I wasn't able to see their perspective. I was so stuck in my own story that someone could tell me, like my family could say, "Hey, like maybe that you made the best decision at the time. You know, maybe the relationship wouldn't have worked anyways." But I just couldn't believe that. I was like, "No, I made a mistake." I was so stuck in my way of thinking. Um, so it's interesting. I knew I was struggling. The problem is I wasn't able to get out of my head. I wasn't able to get out of my thought patterns. That was very challenging when I was kind of down in the struggle.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. So some of the questions in the chat I feel like are a little bit more general. So let's go to Chaz, and if you want to dive in and share a little bit of your story, hopefully we can answer some of your questions towards the end.
Yeah. So when I was, I don't know if anybody plays hockey in this chat, but when I was 17 years old, the hockey path is kind of a very unorthodox path to play at a collegiate level or a professional level. You really kind of move away from home at a young age to go play in the likes of junior hockey or Canada, or, it's not your typical just go and play club hockey in your local state, unless, to be honest, you're in Minnesota playing high school hockey. So it's a very unorthodox path to kind of get to that next level. And, when I was 17 years old, I did have a knee injury that wasn't necessarily a career-ending knee injury, but it made me take a step back because I had just missed all the application deadlines for colleges. You kind of start thinking, in your head, should I have done this? Should I have not done this? That's when you really started questioning, or I started questioning myself. And my playing ability and my confidence in myself. So I truly didn't understand what depression or anxiety was probably until my mid-20s. But again, looking back at my youth sports or trying to play in that junior level and get to that next step, there were a lot of instances where I can turn back and be like, man, I was in a dark place then. And I didn't have anybody to turn to. I didn't know how to turn to anybody, mainly because hockey's culture is a very go out, bruising mentality, man up type of situation. It's a very brutal sport, very similar to football, and all sports, take tolls on our bodies. But the hockey culture is just very, very different in my eyes. And so I didn't really know where to turn or what to do. So I tried to do it on my own. So 19, 18 years old comes around, the injury is kind of back. I'm going to all these junior tryouts, really trying to grind it out. I was a very good, one of the top California players, from the age of 15 to 18 years old. So I got looks from, teams in British Columbia and all these junior and AAA teams, but I just didn't have that confidence like I did before, because I kept thinking to myself, these guys are better, they're bigger, they're faster, they're growing more than me. I wasn't growing as much as I had seen, but I was fast. I was, I'm 5'10", 5'11", 160 pounds, but I'm fast. And I didn't have that confidence. And I'd say it really started when I was 17. Fast forward through the college years, still trying to grind it out through juniors, finally going to college and community college, I felt like I was already behind. That's when really the mental toll started to take a turn in terms of, what do I want to do with my life after sport? Like I mentioned, I didn't have that foundation because I was just always so engulfed every day. You wake up, you go to hockey practice, you go to school, go to baseball practice, immediately drive an hour to hockey practice. I'm awake till midnight. I go home, wake up 6 a.m. I do it all over again. And so, great memories, right? But, since we're here for the mental health side of things, I don't regret it for a second. I regret not taking the education behind your own personal self-care in consideration. And so, when I was 22, I was finally in school playing club hockey, playing college hockey with my buddies, and I just never felt fulfilled. It was kind of that athlete mindset you always had, went into more of a depression. And that's when I actually started to see, well, I'm very knowledgeable in sports. Maybe I can turn that into, broadcasting. So I start dipping into journalism a little bit, seeing if that works. And then next thing you know, that's when the gambling really started. Because I felt like I knew so much about sports. I was missing my competitiveness within sports, within myself too. And so that's when it kind of really started to take a turn from the gambling side of things. And then all of a sudden you see sports in a different light, and all the mental health that I probably could have taken care of at an earlier age is now catching up to me in my 20s, my mid-20s, when you really should start building that foundation towards a career and what's next after life. And so, it went fast. I never took the time to take a step back, where you can take a week off and really learn about yourself when you start to dive into your sport, what you want out of it, how you feel, where's your mind, where's your body, what's next for you after sport. And so, that's when the passion for sports psychology grew, because, I coached hockey for many years out here in Arizona. And I can see it still kind of in kids, where granted, I had 12, 13, all the way up to 15-year-olds. But you can kind of start to see it. You start to see them not practice hard enough, or, they bring a lot of home life into it. And so, for me personally, I always tried to do it on my own. And honestly, I think that's the worst thing you can do. You have to have that support system, friends, teammates, therapist. I finally went to therapy at the age of 30, and it honestly saved my life. And I never thought a hockey player going to therapy was going to be cool, and never considered it. And so you really have to kind of switch your mindset to all sports are the same, because we're all just humans and we're all trying to have fun at the same time, potentially make a career out of it. There's a lot of people in here that are going to reach a much higher level than others, and that's just the reality. But there is a lot after sport. And so I think that's when it kind of really started to take a turn for me, is, later in life, in my 20s, it was time to make that change. And did I get behind because I was in my 20s? No, I would say no. A lot of people might say, oh, you're 30, you missed all your 20s, but it's a new life and it's a new day. And that's why I'm here now.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. Abby actually asked a question that relates to something that you mentioned. And Arik, if you have something to say on this, feel free. So she asked, like, if or when you reached out for help, what was the reaction of other people around you, like friends and family? And do you think that their reaction was helpful, or was it stigmatized?
Yeah. So, and I'll just touch on this quickly. So I actually just did a podcast with a therapist from Florida, and she was specializing in the sports gambling, but she had a similar question where, what was the reaction like? For me personally, I reached out to a close friend first, that maybe would understand, because I was scared to go to family with my depression and my anxiety. And I never got diagnosed. I never went to a doctor for it or anything like that. It was more of a self kind of proclamation to say, hey, it's time to get help. And so I went to a close friend first, and that close friend was just there to listen to me, to see what I had to say. And I'll always remember that conversation, because he did play sports as well at a high level at D1. And so he understood where I was coming from. And then that alone gave me the confidence to then reach out to my dad and my mom and realize there is no disappointment. The only disappointment is going to be, if you don't reach out for help and it affects the rest of your life, because everybody has a different story. Everybody has a different path. I haven't met anybody on this call before today. And so we all have different stories. And that's honestly the beautiful thing at the same time, because we can all reach out for help. You're always going to have people that agree and disagree with whatever it is that you're looking for help for. But me personally, it worked for me to go to a close friend, and I suggest that. But you might have a very close relationship with a brother or a sister or mom and dad that might work as well. The reaction was great. And that just completely opened up Pandora's box for me in terms of confidence to ask for help.
Yeah, and I would follow up on what Chaz just said. I was very lucky to have family that was supportive and did not stigmatize mental health. So that probably helped me open up, right? I think it's a lot easier to open up when you feel, oh, like, I feel comfortable doing so. I would like to think that most people in this room, have parents that care about you, friends that care about you, family that love you. And ultimately, what I found is my family just didn't want me to suffer. So what hurt them was just not knowing how to help me. But all they wanted to do was see me get better. And so, in that sense, it was not stigmatized. Then what helped me, I'm going to just piggyback onto another question here, if that's all right, Andy. But there's been a few questions coming in about how to stop that negative cycle of thoughts. And I think that's a good question, because that's getting into like the practical matter here. So I can speak to my own experience. For me, therapy didn't help me so much when we were talking about my childhood. But then when I found a cognitive behavioral therapist, CBT, that helped me a lot, because, and again, it's about finding the style that can work for you. So for me, cognitive behavioral therapy was very helpful immediately to kind of help me have some tools to question my thoughts or work with my thoughts, to sit with my thoughts, become aware of my thoughts. Since then, I also have I'm actually certified as a mindfulness meditation instructor. So that's something that I got very interested in. And that helps me today with my mind. So mindfulness and different practices, different mindfulness practices, including a formal meditation practice, helps me a lot. But again, similar to therapy, I think there's so many tools out there. It's about finding the right one for you and being a bit proactive about it, because there's so many good Zen sayings and quotes, but like it's what's one of the best ones I love is the mind is excellent servant but a terrible master. And I think it's something that the mind is constantly, we tend to as a coach, I always say we can work on our physical, like our fitness, we can work on our skill, whatever sport you're playing, and you can work on the mental, on your mind. But I feel oftentimes that third one is neglected. We all go to the gym, we have strength and conditioning coaches, but we don't all have a mandatory mental fitness coach, but we all have a strength coach in college. So those are just things that as I've gotten older, I'm getting more involved in. So that's the answer to the question. Me personally, mindfulness, meditation, and cognitive behavioral therapy helps me a lot.
Awesome. Yeah. So just to like touch on the first question. So with like reaching out to other people, and if it was stigmatized, not everybody's going to have like the same story with that. Like when I was growing up, it was very, very stigmatized. It was always like rub some dirt on it, man up, like don't cry, all that stuff. And I'm a very, very emotional person, if you know me. And when I was starting to talk to my parents about it, probably like in college is when I first started to notice that I was having symptoms of anxiety and depression. I thought that I was going to get thrown back in my face again especially from my dad. But to my surprise, like they were actually both really supportive of it. They had a lot of questions. And then my dad actually told me that he felt like he did something wrong. And it was to no fault of his own. Like, these symptoms were likely going to develop regardless of how it was treated when I was younger. But not everybody's going to have the same story. And it sounds like we were all pretty lucky in having supportive friends and family. Awesome. So there are a lot of great questions in the chat here. Oh gosh, I think that Olivia's is really interesting. So like, do you think that it's easier to talk about mental health as a women's coach rather than if you were a men's coach or being like on a men's like tennis team?
Yeah, that is a good question. For me, no. But for others, it may be the case, because I think it is a very, very good question. For me, no, because I can say as an assistant coach, I was coaching men and women, and I was the same as I am now. I was very open about my mental health. I think for me, it was more about my personal experience. And once I went through my challenges with mental health, it just changed me, because the amount of empathy that I got from that for those who struggle is just endless. So it didn't matter if I was coaching men or women. I think that it can play a factor. I think it's really, the other questions here are also really good about, and I'm curious to hear Chaz's thoughts on this, how to help men open up, because that is a challenge for us as men. And I think it comes back to oftentimes it being seen as a weakness, right? And especially in the arena of sports, you don't want to be weak, because if you're weak, you might not play. So I find that challenge as a head coach, that players don't always want to open up to me about their struggles, even though I'm very open. And I don't think they feel I'll judge them. I think they're worried that they might lose playing time, right? And I think there's so many challenges there as an athlete, that you don't want to be seen weak. You don't want to be, you're seeing vulnerability as weakness. And for me, vulnerability is strength. I know we hear that a lot, but I really believe that to be true. And I found that one of the best ways to help men open up is by me opening up. I'm a man. If I open up and people see that, you can do it, and that I feel I'm a very strong person, and I can also be very vulnerable, and I can also be weak because I'm a human, then other men can also feel that way. So I try to just do it myself. I don't know how to make people do it. I don't think it works like that. So I'm curious, Chaz, what you think about how to help men open up.
Yeah. It's It's tough. Like I said, I'm 33 years old. So it took a long time for a lot of even my closest friends to open up and talk about their mental health struggles and their addiction. I have two very close friends of mine that are alcoholics. One is 2 years sober. The other one is just past 14 years. And I lived with him at the time when he did go to rehab. He was dealing with his own health issues and really mental struggles at a younger age. And it took a long time for me to even open up to them, knowing what they've gone through. And so I think you hit a breaking point, I did at least, where, there are thoughts of suicide and kind of that the dark thoughts that you don't want to come into play ever. They do pass through. And then that's when I kind of really started to realize I need help for not just myself, but those around me, because it is going to affect me. So to get a man to open up, it's hard because it comes at their own time for me, from what I've experienced. But I think the more that we talk about this, or, you see if they are struggling and you just ask very simple questions. How you doing today? What was work like? How was your sport? How was your workout? What's your body feeling? How's your mind? Are you not starting, the game? Do you feel like you should be starting? Do you feel like you're overworking yourself? You can ask, I think, certain questions and kind of get those clues where maybe it might be time for that person to open up about something going on in their life. Family dynamic comes into play huge with athletes, because our escape is sport. Like, that's why I think a lot of us play so competitively, not just the fire within us that wants to be a champion or be successful at our sport, but it's also an escape from a lot of outside world problems. Where I put on the skates, I could literally go skate for 8 hours a day. I could never get off the ice. Bring me lunch onto the bench, I'll eat it and I'll go right back. It was my escape. And so, a lot of us treat sport like that. And so to get people to open up is to just continue having conversations and really kind of, joining panels like this, or, following the right accounts, on social media. Like, I think you did mention it, right? There's a lot of quotes out there that we can fall back on, but it's making sure that you're also not just following the accounts, but you're also understanding what they are posting, like giving you the confidence to open up when it comes to a certain time. I just want to answer Katie's question, because I think it's honestly great. What do you think needs to change in the hockey culture? Being a hockey guy, Katie, thank you for that question. It's a culture that goes back so long, right? Because we still have fighters. I mean, we still can fight in games. It's a different type of culture when you go out there. Football players, sometimes they throw punches with helmets on. It just doesn't make sense, right? And so, but in hockey, you kind of settle it. You start to see more of a respect factor also with some of those fights. It's not so the fighting that, I think the fighting is actually changing the hockey culture, in my opinion, for the better, because you do see afterwards the respect that those guys have for each other. And I think the culture within hockey is slowly changing to more of a not man up mentality, but respecting who their opponent is and respecting how it took them to get to the level that they're also playing at and the struggles that they probably went through. To change an entire culture takes a long time. And especially, here for men's mental health, it's going to take a long time for it to really start to change and to see those changes. What do I think does need to change in the hockey culture, though? I do think coaches need to have more accountability for how they treat their players. I was a hockey coach, and I've had dozens of coaches that I thought were great. I relied heavily on the assistant coaches because I felt they could make more my game to me versus the head coach who was making decisions on behalf of an entire organization and potentially losing his job. So I do think the culture with the men's or women's, like the head coaching, needs to change a little bit and not have so much, I think, power over everything. I think the decision-making needs to come full circle, because you have a coaching staff for a reason. Everybody needs to work together. And I think in hockey, that's still missing a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. Like, it does take a long time to change a culture. And, that's our goal of like being on this call, right? Is to change a culture around mental health, just in athletics in general. Yeah, definitely hockey, like football, those other like really physical, brutal sports are gonna be a little bit more difficult to make that change. But I didn't think about that part about how the people who are fighting like have that respect for each other.
Yeah, if you watch a lot of videos, they tap each other after maybe a scuffle, right? And it's a lot of those enforcers are guys that are there to protect, the stars. It's not out there bruising like it is back in the day. The fighting, they've tried to take fighting out of the game because there has been a lot of scary, instances where somebody has gotten knocked out unconscious, me included. I tried to pick fights with the biggest guys and I'm tiny, so I suggest not doing that. But it's turning into a respect factor. Like, hey, just know that I'm here. Stay away from my star player, and all will be okay. Whereas before it was a lot different. It was to input fear into the other team, and that's just not needed really anymore because there's just so much talent out there in all sports nowadays that we want to see the best talent on the field. We don't want to see people get hurt. It's an entertainment, but at the same time we have to treat them as human beings. So it's a very interesting culture.
Hey, tennis is tough too. In tennis, if you look at someone the wrong way, you could get a point penalty.
Yeah.
That's the extent of tennis. If we stare at someone, if we yell "come on" and stare at someone, we actually do get point penalties.
Oh man,
it's a little bit different.
Yeah. Sam just asked a good question too. So this is a pretty common problem that some of our campus captains and like other student athletes have as well, is when a coach or other people in authority, so like athletic administration, for example, if they're not supportive of this and, they're not getting any of the help that they're looking for in making that change, what do you think is the next best step for somebody? I know that's a hard question too.
Yeah. I mean, I immediately come back to that incident that just happened with Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin. Obviously that kind of went viral recently, and that's the most common, probably most outspoken situation in terms of mental health with an athlete, that, he was taking a 2-week hiatus, a break for himself, wasn't ready to come and talk to the coach. For those of you who haven't seen it yet, Lane Kiffin was caught on camera saying, get off the team. I can kick you off the team. Forget your mental health. I think it's really important. Mental health there's so many aspects. I can't even wrap my head around everything, right? Like, I am not the most knowledgeable person in this. I come really based from personal experience, and I hope people can relate. But for me, seeing that, it's hard because Lane Kiffin was very wrong in how he approached it with the athlete. At the same time, I don't want mental health to also turn into an excuse for somebody to not go out there and be a part of the team. If they don't want to be a part of it, just quit, right? If there is something else going on, definitely get the help that you need and come back. I want mental health to be a very positive talk. I don't want people to use it. I'm not saying this athlete was using it in a negative context by any means. I'm just saying I want people to be very comfortable talking about it. And he didn't feel comfortable enough to talk about it quite yet, and I hope he gets there. The way the coach reacted was very, very wrong. There's a lot of athletes in this world. I just really hope we can talk about mental health in a positive light where we can help each other and not have it be used as an excuse to get out of like a homework assignment. At the end of the day, we need to help ourselves first and foremost. We need to make sure that we're doing the necessary steps in fixing our mental health or helping our mental health, whether it is therapy, talking to friends. Make sure that you're doing, actively doing something to benefit your mental health. And then you'll really start to see how more open you can become with your coaches, and maybe they will react in a different way. That whole situation was wrong. I don't want that to be the staple of the situation. I hope other coaches can come out and start to see, and talk to their teams in a different manner. But also at the end of the day, there's a lot of people that are in a different generation that we have to understand, that come from a different generation. It's not an excuse on their end, but how do we react with people that are dealing with mental health to maybe somebody who is from a different generation? Talk confidently, talk from your heart, talk from what's in your head, and just be honest and open about what is going on and help them see your perspective. That's kind of that's a tough one. It really is.
Yeah, and I would add on to that. It's kind of, Lane Kiffin example is a good one, and as a college coach, it's the world I'm in. I would say Sam's question and Tyler's question are also very connected here. The last two questions asked, it is true what Tyler you said, because every time someone comes out and shares their experience with someone, and it's a very hard thing to do. And then when you feel you're not being heard or listened to or understood, it can really hurt you and prevent you from doing it again. So I think it's a really important point. Like I said earlier, I'm lucky that in my experience, when I've shared my vulnerability, it's been positively responded, or the response has been quite supportive. I do think that deters people from sharing. So when that does happen, what I would say, if you have a coach, or yeah, let's say coach for this example, who you don't feel is supportive, I think it's really important to the first question I would ask is, have you tried to go talk to your coach? And that's hard. So if you don't feel comfortable going alone, maybe you have a few teammates that can go with you, and you can actually, go with 3 teammates and have a conversation with the coach about mental health and why you think it's important, or whatever you think is not going so well. Maybe there's an assistant coach, like Chad said earlier. Sometimes the assistant's the best person you can go to, and if there's an assistant you trust, that may be a good way in, just to kind of run it by them. It's tough because every team is so different, and I think the challenge is you want to be able to communicate with the person in the way you feel comfortable, because ultimately the person in charge is the one that we want to, I don't know, not change, but you want to see their behavior change, right? So, and then I think if you've exhausted all those things, that's when sometimes there is a point when you need to go to someone else. Like maybe you have someone on campus, you know, that could take this. Like if there's a situation of abuse, that may not be something you would go to your coach if they're the abuser, right? You're going to have to go to someone above them. But I think the first question I would always ask is, have you talked to your coach yet, or have you talked to the person in charge? And sometimes you'd be surprised by the reaction. They may actually have their reasons, and they may actually be able to express them to you, and then maybe you can both understand each other better, and hopefully they'll be like, oh wow, I didn't see it that way, thank you for showing me. Like I can say that I make a lot of mistakes as a coach. I have so many blind spots, and I'm always more worried about what my blind spots are. Like the things I know I'm messing up, those are good because I'm aware of them. But sometimes I say something that hurts someone's feelings, and I didn't even know I didn't realize I said it. And I love when a player comes to me, tells me, hey coach, when you say that, like it kind of makes me feel this way. I mean, that's for me, like, okay, I'll adjust. And I would hope that you have coaches that would listen. But if you don't, then you go to the next stage. So yeah, I would encourage you, and also keep in mind, like those hard conversations are areas to grow. And every time you practice having a hard conversation, because these are hard conversations, you will grow as a person. And we talk about growth mindset in sports, but it's beyond the field, right? It's not just on the court. It's also in conversations, and it's learning how to be a better communicator. And being a leader, if you want to be a leader in any field, you're going to have hard conversations. So I would say it's a good practice of how to have hard conversations, but you have to kind of stay in your comfort, your in a healthy place, right? Because if you feel completely out of your comfort zone too far, it's not healthy. But if you're a little uncomfortable, that could be a good place to be in. So yeah, that's how I would respond to that.
Awesome. Thank you both for the responses and just like this conversation too. I really appreciate it. I hope some of the campus captains are like able to take some things away too. Chaz and Art, do you have like any final thoughts, something that you want to leave the campus captains with?
Yeah, I mean, I know there was a bunch of questions that came in all at once. I don't know if we did answer all of them. I don't know if I actually spoke on this, but Gabby, your question on how do you recognize unproductive thoughts? Like, when do I notice them coming? I think the biggest thing for me quickly is if you really just get lost in your thoughts, it could be the mindless scrolling. It could be, you had something set, a task that you needed to be done, and all of a sudden you do get distracted because you're thinking about an outcome of something that's not even happening yet. So, I think having little things that can keep you productive during those thoughts is important. I have one of these little buzzers, little beepers, and they're $5 on Amazon. I set it to 1 hour. And if I need to be productive for 1 hour, I I set it and my phone is aside and I do whatever I need to do for the full hour till that buzzer goes off. So if I start to have an unproductive thought, that's one way for me to kind of manage it is be productive. Better said than done sometimes. But it's also just managing what, also keeps you happy. Sometimes I've got a 90-pound golden retriever sleeping on the floor right behind me, but I take him for a run or a walk or something along those lines to get outside for 30 minutes. It's the little things that I see that I do, to be outside, get some fresh air, come back, regroup, and kind of get back into it. For me, it has been working out also lately, waking up, having that good routine. A lot of unproductive thoughts go through my head on a daily basis, but it's just having really what works for you. And it takes time to find what works for you. And so I would suggest just trying a bunch of different things. It could be a 30-minute walk. It could be writing down a couple of thoughts. I'm not a huge journal person. I'm not a big writer. I'm more of kind of a digital. I love calling a buddy to catch up, say, hey, how's work been? Or how's the baby? Or, what's going on? So that's kind of how I would say just manage maybe some unproductive thoughts.
My turn?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. I mean, to close, I guess I would say, again, going back to my own experience, before I experienced my own mental health kind of personal experience, I was as strong as any athlete. I was as fit as any athlete. I was in the gym 6 days a week, my early 20s, but also in college. Like, I was crushing it on the outside and on the inside. I was like, really, I saw myself as almost naively invincible. And I think that's the biggest takeaway that I've learned as I get older. I'm also like Chaz, I'm 34. So we're running a close race here. And I've just become more humble in the sense that I think you all know this, but appearances can be deceiving. Just because someone looks like they have it all together, or they look online or on social media like they've got it all figured out, or there's, whatever definition of success we have, it can look like everyone else has figured it out and we don't. And I think that's one of the things that causes, I see in my team, a lot of stress and, to be honest, just unhappiness. And I think it's just not true. It's an illusion. I think the more we can check in with ourselves and kind of find what makes us happy, like what Chaz just said, whether it's calling a friend, going for a walk with your dog. For me, having some form of inner practice is really important, whether that's some form of stillness like meditation, or I actually do like writing and journaling. So for me, that's a great practice, which again just shows there's so many ways for so many different people. But I think we need to take responsibility for our mental health. It's not something that will just happen on its own. And I think that's the accountability bit. Like in tennis, in doubles, when you have a doubles partner, we often, I'll put it this way, in singles, tennis players are very tough on themselves. Mentally, they're berating themselves. They're very negative on the court very often. And we always go up to a player as a coach and we say, hey, if you're playing doubles right now, how would you talk to your doubles partner if they just made a mistake? And every time they go, oh, I would tell them, hey, don't worry about it. You got the next one. But then it's like, why don't you say that to yourself in singles, right? And it's the same in life. Like, we're so hard on ourselves, but we're always supporting our friends. But really, we need to be our own best friend and support ourselves. But supporting ourselves, like Chad said earlier, doesn't always mean taking it easy. Sometimes that is also holding yourself accountable to do the hard thing you don't feel like doing. Sometimes it's also realizing you need help and you need to reach out to someone and you can't do it alone. And ultimately it means being kind to yourself no matter what you're going through. I think that's the most important. But yeah, so that's kind of a lot of different things I just closed up with because it's so hard. But I think being kind to yourself would be the ultimate, and communicating and asking for help when you're struggling, because there's almost everyone struggles way more than you may know or even think.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you again. I really appreciate both of you for being so open about this as well, and being vulnerable as well.